Hi everyone, welcome back to another episode of Opinionate. Here I have my friend and fellow philosophy club student, John, and today we're going to be discussing the idea of death within the context of Buddhist philosophy. Hi John, can you introduce yourself?
Okay, hi everyone. I'm John, and I just came from public school, and it's my second year in basis, and I got half scholarship in basis, and I really like playing tennis, and also I'm learning Buddhist philosophy and also metaphysics, which is very exciting.
Great, it's great to have you here, John, and you might see John in the future too on this podcast. So, John, can you tell us, first as a background, are you a Buddhist yourself?
Nope, I'm not, because like when I'm trying to investigate Buddhism, like I first of all I'm trying to see like which religion I should be in. And
Mhm.
after that I find Buddhism and I find it's quite different from other religions. And I find it's quite interesting and I began to investigate it. But actually I'm not a true believer in Buddhism.
I see. Well, you mentioned Buddhism as a religion, but so I guess there's two parts to my question. The first is, do you think that Buddhism is theistic? Like, does it posit the existence of a god? If not, why does it count as a religion if it's atheistic?
Okay, so I think like there are many definitions for religion. So the first one, I think, like I remember like is it has a god and there are some like people gathering together and do some ceremony or things like that.
Hmm.
And I think the second definition is like a group of people that are doing something, like sharing some doctrines and their beliefs, but they don't have to have a God. And actually, in Buddhism, they maybe they have God, but actually they don't really emphasize on God. Like,
Hmm.
mm, for example, like Buddha. Do you think Buddha
Right.
is a God? Absolutely not, because he said that I am not God. I am just a human being who has a weight
Hmm.
from the conventional society. So I
Right.
think, yeah, yeah. So I think that is, um, I think so. I think from my perspective, Buddhism is a religion, but from a from not a really conventional definition, and
Hmm.
also it does not emphasize too much on God, which is yeah, which is very special. Yeah.
I see. Well, yeah, I guess some people would probably say that the Buddha seems to have supernatural powers, or at least his followers seems to attribute supernatural powers onto him, which sort of makes him a god. Maybe not the god as in Judeo-Christian religions, but maybe a god as in Hinduism or even
Mm.
the pantheonic religions of ancient Greek. Well, on that note, you mentioned Buddhism as something you found very special. So can you tell us a bit about the journey of how you learned about this religion, and what are some of the reasons do you think that it stood out to you compared to other religions?
Mm. Okay, sure. So I started to learn Buddhism from seventh grade. And during that time, I feel like because I'm in public school, it's very harsh to survive in public school. Like
Hmm.
every day we have more than three tests. Can you imagine that? Oh, damn. And like
Yeah.
actually, Buddhism tells us to like life is to suffer. And if you want to get salvation, you have to leave those suffering. And the Buddhism actually offers us several ways and give us some thoughts to help us and to be mindful and to get away from those suffering. So
Hmm.
I found out that like it's quite special because it don't emphasize on God, and also it's quite it's teach me a lot to make myself calm down and see those things in a more clearly way, which
Hmm.
is very helpful. Yeah,
Yeah.
so that's the motivation for me to investigate Buddhism. And after that, like after I investigate Buddhism for 2 years, like in ninth grade, and I found out that Buddhism logic or metaphysics so important. And it's so funny,
Hmm.
very interesting. Like it talks about those ethic problems, the being and not beings. Even though I do not know that a lot.
Hmm.
That is very interesting. I'm now currently learning those things. Yeah.
Yeah, it's great to hear that. Well, I guess before we jump into our main topic, which is the idea of death, I have one final kind of follow-up. So you mentioned that you got into Buddhism because of the adversaries and difficulties you were facing in your public school life. I was wondering because from the way you describe it, it seems like Buddhism is like an escape, more like an escapism. Is that what it is, or is it telling you to like face the challenge and to affirm the challenge? So, when we face an adversary, there's always two ways we can deal with it. The first is we try to get around it, and the second is we try to overcome it directly. So, which one do you think is the path that Buddhism has offered to you?
Okay, so I would like to say like both. Buddhism have both of them. So
Hmm.
for the first part, like when we are trying to avoid those suffering, we have to face them because Buddhism offers us a way, and Buddhist doctrine told us that our heart is like a factory, and this factory actually can modify your bad experience, um your bad experience from others, from teachers, or from exams.
Hmm.
And when we are trying to use our heart to modify it to let it be like mm, good things, like the energy for us to keep going, and the mind for us to see that it is not the whole thing, it's not the big things in our whole life. Like our whole life is so big, like such as little things is unable to defeat us during the journey of our life.
Right. I mean, that's sort of the whole idea of Western philosophy too. For example, Platonism will tell you that, the phenomenal world is somehow not true or not real, or you shouldn't invest so much
Mm.
into it. Uh, which is a kind of a universal idea in philosophy. So let's get into the actual questions that I've prepared to discuss with John. So the first question is, how does Buddhist philosophy conceptualize and think about death? And in what ways does it differ from Western perspectives on death? What do you think?
Okay, so I think actually Buddhism, they view the death as a very natural part of our cycle of life. It's like I we have all heard a very famous Chinese sentence and then translated it into English. So life is the continuation of death. Death is the transformation of life. Life has not been born, death has not been died. Life and death are the same. So this sentence taught us if you don't have birth, you will not have death. And in other words, if you don't have death, you will don't have born. So it's in a cycle, like they're all the same. If so yeah. And Buddhism also sees that as an opportunity for spiritual growth and transformation. Like some of the masters when they're I don't know, like maybe like they get in the higher level of our human beings and they escape from the reincarnation. Well, that cannot be proved, but I think we cannot disprove that. And I think that's very different from Western perspectives because many Western perspectives often focus on the finality of death and the afterlife, like people go to heaven or whether they are going to hell. There's no way after people go into heaven or hell. But however, in Buddhism, it's talk about it's a cycle, and
Mhm.
many Western views may center on the fear of death and the quest for immortality.
Yeah. So basically, I guess what you're describing here is kind of like the doctrine of reincarnation in philosophy, wherein after you die, you get through a process and then you get rebirth into another life, and then this cycle goes on and on. Um, so I guess just out of like curiosity, I didn't thought to ask this question before, but what kind of beings, right, can be included in reincarnation? Like, can I reincarnate into animals, plants, a computer? Like, what are the kind of boundaries for reincarnation?
Okay, so there's actually six like realms of them that can
Mm-hmm.
be involved in the reincarnation. So actually, plants and computer they cannot be included in it.
Mm-hmm.
So like the lowest level, I'm not trying to specify the lowest level is
Okay.
those monsters, those devils, and
What about like microorganisms?
well, it depends. It's like if you with them in animals, I think probably, but they're in plants, no.
I mean, like bacteria, for example.
I don't think so. I don't really know about it. Yeah, but
Okay.
actually, I don't think so. I don't.
Yeah, so I guess the criteria here is you have to be conscious.
Yeah.
You have to have subjective experience of some sort to be reincarnated into. Yeah, I guess, but when you put it that way, it seems like when I die, there's a high chance that I'm going to lose a lot of what I have. For
Hmm.
example, right now I have some knowledge of philosophy, some knowledge of the natural sciences, but suppose I get reborn to a kangaroo, well then I'd lose all that knowledge.
Yeah.
So, it says, well, technically I guess I survived, but I still lost a lot of precious memories. And I lost a part of what I'll consider to be my identity, right?
Mhm.
So, for example, I think being a student of philosophy is part of who I am. And obviously, as a kangaroo, I'm no longer a student of philosophy. So, I guess in that sense, I still like death is still a death of a part of me, no?
Hmm.
Or do you think that I can survive that entirely? And all of that knowledge and identity is just stored deep within something, you know.
Well, not really. Like in reincarnation,
Hmm.
only karma and the consciousness of that specific species of animals will be transferred into next generations due to Buddhism doctrines.
I see. So I'll lose a lot of memories, for
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
example.
But if you want to keep going to be a human beings,
Hmm.
um, from Buddhism perspective, maybe you should ah like behave good.
Oh yeah. So I guess if I'm like a good boy, then I get to keep all of that, which is I guess, but it still makes death kind of a risky endeavor,
Yeah.
because I at least I don't know if I'm gonna get reborn to a human again. Well, I guess on the bright side, I might get reborn into something even better, right? I
Mm,
might get reborn into I think one of the six realms is the sky, man, the gods.
mm.
Well, sort of like the gods. Well, like supernatural beings from our perspective. If I'm reborn to them, then presumably I can continue to pursue a lot of things, but regardless, I'm still gonna lose a lot of memories, no? Because, if I didn't, then I should have a lot of memories of my past lives, which I don't. So it seems like even with reincarnation, it's still a big deal to die,
Hmm.
right? And I think this brings us to my second question, which is the Buddhist idea that we really have no identity, that at bottom there's no selfhood. So how do you think this kind of idea that we have no self influence the Buddhist perception of death, and what does it mean to, have no self and to die or to reborn?
Okay. So the concept of non-self is there is no a permanent unchanging self or soul. And this understanding influenced the perception of death by suggesting that death, like dies
Hmm.
is not a fixed self, but a collection of experiences, thoughts, and feelings, which is five segregations. And by realizing that there is no the true self, like there is no materialism self, individuals can approach death with less fear because they no more think like they will be suffering so much on the body, and they will have a more open attitude towards this really pretty natural process of change and rebirth.
Yeah, but I guess, I think what matters to me is still like these experiences and thoughts. They matter to me a lot. And, you can think also in terms of, for example, Albert Einstein came up with the theory of relativity. Maybe theory of relativity matters a lot to him, but he loses that when he dies, right?
Mm.
So, how does that make death less bad, having no self?
Okay, so from my opinion, I think when you're making some um ideas or thoughts, like Einstein, he investigated the relativism and a relativity theory,
Hmm.
and after he died and he reborn, and he as a human being, he is able to read
Maybe
that
a
again,
she.
he or she, maybe are able to read that
Maybe a
again.
it. Maybe it's reborn timelines, but
Okay, okay, sure.
I don't know. Right.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Maybe he, she, or it will know this concept again
Hmm.
and relearn it again, which is
Sure.
not so bad, right? If you still want to learn this and keep those experience after you're reborn, you should behave well from Buddhist
Hmm.
perspective.
Yeah. And by the way, please ignore the radio broadcast. It's quite unfortunate because we're recording in a dormitory. Um, so I guess that's the point I was trying to make. So I think that the question of how Albert Einstein should care about the theory of relativity, that's a bit of a misnomer because in Buddhist philosophy, there's really no such thing as Albert Einstein, right? All you have is thoughts, experiences, ideas had by no one really. It just happens. So if I ask you, okay, so let's say, for example, I'm a gender person. I say, well, agender identity really matters to me. I guess from a Buddhist perspective, that's kind of the mistake starts right there, right? By my premise that it matters to me already presupposes the existence of a selfhood, this thing as me, and so on. So I guess if you put it that way, if we really have no self, um, there's really nothing to lose because there's nothing to have in the first place,
Mm.
which I think is quite an odd idea from my perspective. But I do understand that not just people in Buddhist philosophy, but people in the so-called mainstream analytic philosophy, like Derek Parfit, also held very similar ideas. Parfit actually quoted from Buddhist texts multiple times when he argued that what matters is not identity. What matters is survival, and
Mm.
you don't have to survive by having a kind of enduring identity. All you need is to have uh like is to have mental states that are sufficiently similar to each other. And there's really nothing that kind of is overarching or nothing that is underlying all of these psychological states. So that's quite an interesting idea. And yeah, I guess right. I guess this leads us to the perhaps most important question, which is how exactly does reincarnation shape our attitudes towards death? And this attitude may be moral or it might be normative, maybe even aesthetic attitudes towards death. So how do you think reincarnation is important in seeing death?
Okay, so I think it's quite similar to the second question.
Hmm.
So belief in rebirth shapes the attitudes toward death and as a transition rather than an end. And this perspective actually encouraged those believers to live ethically and mindfully. So it's changed people's attitude because they know that it matters for them to be a human beings in the next generation. Like they want to have those human beings experience or those logical thinking they want to have,
Hmm.
and so people are trying to um they're actually trying to behave ethically and morally, mindfully, and to in order to become what they want to be after reincarnation. And actually, the karma, which is, I want to say, the action of the people, will influence their future birth. And they and Buddhism tell people that death is not the final, but a step in an ongoing cycle. And I think very important things for karma is,
Hmm.
unlike Western, like in Western philosophy, they are talking about like, if you do some good things, you can cancel out some bad things, and you will be neutral, right?
Uh, well, it depends. Well, yeah, I suppose so.
Yeah, and so actually in Buddhism, it's not true because they really don't have the standard for them to find out what thing is good, what thing is bad, because like um it is very personal things. Like people's experience are just their personal things. It has nothing to do with the society and social norms. And
Hmm.
so when people are making some good, like so-called good things,
Hmm.
it's actually cannot cancel out the bad things you make because actually the good things you make will also leads to a good consequence in the future, and the bad things will also leads to a bad consequence in the future. They are not uh contradict.
Well, so like for example, right? Suppose I steal some money, and suppose that the punishment for that in Buddhism is, um, I get burned for a few seconds, which was very devastating. But on the other hand, I also donate a few bucks to a charity, which is supposed to allow me to have an enjoyable
Mm.
dessert. So does this mean that in the afterlife, or in the transitional period, or in my next life in the reincarnation cycle, I'm going to first get burned and then get a dessert, rather than just get nothing? But that seems to me uh to be weirdly, complicated, because, every time what's the evidence for that though? Like what kind of reasoning will lead you to say that, rather than simply to say that, oh, if you do this and that, you'll simply get nothing? Like what's the actual difference between those?
Well, I think it's like different things they have different logic. Like if you first rob a bank and after that you give it to the church, there's actually not really much connection between it. It's like when you are after you rob a bank, you got punishment from policemen. That is a whole logic for stealing things. And actually for you give those money for the church, there's
Hmm.
actually another logic line, which is maybe you will get salvation from the God. Well,
Yeah,
they're
well,
not
but
actually
but wouldn't
interconnected.
it be better if we just had one logical system?
Well, that's not Buddhist perspective. No, that's not Buddhism talking.
Because like even when you're talking about actual laws, if you rob a bank for a good cause, you actually get less punishment. Do you know that? Like in actual law.
Oh,
Right, so why would Buddhists insist that you would have to be punished and then get rewarded? That seems to me to be a bit, maybe not absurd, but uh no one actually does that in the real world, right? When a criminal has like we just like if a criminal does some good things, we just simply give he or her less punishment, rather than, oh, we give the same amount of punishment and then we give them a reward. That seems to me, um I don't know, maybe you're trying to, maybe, whoever designed the system, presumably no one, as in Buddhism, there's no creator God. Whoever designed the system wants it to make it clear that each action individually correspond with a consequence, and that this kind of system is also subjective to people. Because, you would suppose that Buddha would tell you what's good and what's not.
I don't think so.
So I guess everyone's just on, but he discovered the ultimate truth, didn't he? Like, he probably would have known what's good and what's not.
Yeah, he actually is like he made like a list, but it's just 10 things good and 10 things bad. Well, that's the main principles for those monks in the temples to behave, and that's principles. But I think actually there are many types of restriction only in Buddhism, and that has nothing to do with which is harmful to people, which is benefit to people. So I think Buddhism is actually trying to like in in eighth in the eightfold path, he actually told people to be mindful, but mm, and nothing too much. But actually, when he is trying to ask those monks who is truly in practice of the Buddhism and trying to like uh be a better species after reincarnation, they
Hmm.
have to behave like that. Yeah.
I see. So, from what I can gather, it seems to me that number one, this system of karma, understood as an ethical system, it's not deontological in the sense that it's not all about following different rules. It's also not utilitarian in the sense that, it makes a big difference of whether you're mindful
Yeah, yeah.
or not when you committed the action.
Actually, in Buddhism, there are so many things, like so many dimensions. Like
Hmm.
there are a lot of hundreds of routes for suffering and also a lot of bad experience. So it's really hard for Buddhist philosopher to clean up all those um intricate stuff and form those um actually very short and brief principles for people to behave.
You mean hundreds of rules or
Uh like things that can lead to.
like actions and consequences?
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, that does seem to be to me like um well, first of all, I guess I would like to know if this system is consequentialist or not. So, like, if I go rob the bank, but I do it, like, without being mindful of it, I just did it out of instinct. Compared to if I robbed a bank mindfully, I was fully conscious of my actions, I was fully self-conscious. Which one would earn me more karma, or would they earn me the same?
well, actually, the arrow here is you if you're being mindfully in Buddhism perspective, you actually will not go to rob the bank.
Yeah, but what if I was just like do it consciously? Does it matter? Or I was doing it, for example, um, I was either doing it for a bad intention, like I just wanted to ruin people's lives, as compared to I robbed the bank for a good intention. Like, does it matter? Or like, is it the only the consequence that matters, or does my intention matter too when you're judging an action?
Well, as I said, like if you are trying to rob a bank with good intention, that's from my perspective, that's cannot be existed. That's not exist.
What do you mean? Well, I guess like a lot of people rob banks. No, no, I mean, but a lot of people do things that break the rules of society, but to achieve a better end.
Hmm. Well, I think like if they're trying to rob a bank, well, that's not good because if they are trying to make the society better, they should like use their own work to earn money and spend their time
Yeah,
to
well,
earn money.
let's just give the
That's
classic example, right? Like your wife needs a medicine, it costs too much, there's no way you can get it and by any lawful means, and you just break into the pharmacy and just take the medicine. So, like, what's the Buddhist analysis of this situation?
well, I don't really know that, but I guess like from my perspective, when you're trying like from in this case, it's
Hmm.
actually you will not get so much punishment on it.
But you will still get some punishment.
Yeah, yeah. Because you did
Uh,
something good and your intention is good, but your action is not so good.
But shouldn't you get the full punishment and then get some reward? Which is kind of
Well,
ridiculous, to be honest. But like I don't know. So this seems to me to be like a combination of deontology with consequentialism, um, which is quite interesting. And I think ultimately it sounded a lot like Immanuel Kant. Like in his groundwork for future like moral metaphysics. He talks about what matters is the will, what matters is the intention, the action itself. Well, that's up to the world. I couldn't really control that. So it seems to me from what I've heard that the Buddhist conception of karma has a lot in common with the Kantian conception of deontology. Although, as John said, the consequence also seems to matter here because if you rob the bank for a good intention, apparently you'll still get punishment.
you will get punishment from robbing a bank, but you will also get reward from the good intention.
Yeah, but like suppose I'm a mindful person, I'm still going to break to the pharmacy and take the medicine. Like if I'm really mindful, I still will because it's a good thing. It saves a life. It saves my wife.
Mm. Well, from this perspective, I think you will get reward
Just reward.
and also punishment.
Well, yeah, but so you're saying that even a mindful person can get punished.
Yeah, because it's
What?
like why he is mindful. Like he is trying to use his like he is robbing a bank or steal some medicine with mindfulness, right?
Uh-huh.
So that's actually in Buddhism that's impossible.
No, like I need the medicine for a person I love. I'm a mindful person. Should I rob the bank? Should I rob the pharmacy to get the medicine? Well, obviously I should, because or else I'll just be letting my wife die. That's gonna be worse. Like that's more unimaginable for a mindful person to do.
Mm. Well, that depends. Like if you are if you find out that you steal the medicine and you save your wife is actually more important, then that's okay. Yeah.
So a mindful person can do that,
Yeah, yeah.
but will he get punished for it?
Of course.
So a mindful person can get punished.
Yes.
Yeah, so yeah, that's kind of the taste of consequentialism there. Well, like I guess in Kantian philosophy, as long as you have good intentions, you'll never get punished. Well, you will never deserve punishment, to be more precise. But I guess in this conception of Buddhism, you can still get punished even if you are well-intended.
Yeah.
Okay. Um, Great. So let's talk about the next issue then. We don't really have that much time left, as a matter of fact, only about 20 to half an hour. Um, so what's the ultimate goal of this cycles of reincarnation and acting good and gathering karma?
Okay, so the fundamental goal, like it has been shown in the first truth in the Four Noble Doctrines in Buddhism.
Mm.
So the first truth is actually say that there is a lot of suffering in the world
Right.
that Buddhism tried to solve. The universe is pervaded by suffering and the cause of suffering, and the Buddha did not set out to prove this. He took this as a datum and one that is obvious to anyone on serious reflection, the one that can escape most of us most of the time precisely because our invasion of serious reflection in order not to face this fact. The Buddha also assumed that suffering is a bad thing. And even when one does not know that one is suffering, and even when one experiences suffering as pleasure, like it is still suffering. And the fundamental goal for Buddhism
Wait. Just
is
hold on for a second. On the face of it, that sounds a bit weird. So if you don't know that you're suffering, you're not suffering, or are you still suffering but you just don't know it?
well, if you like Buddhism, like they think if they see you as suffering, but you're not
Knowing.
see it as
Uh-huh.
knowing it as a suffering,
Yeah.
you consider it as a pleasure. then you don't really have to get into Buddhism doctrines
But
to
are you
learn.
suffering though?
Yes, you're suffering,
But you
but
don't know you're suffering.
but actually, like suffering is very a personal experience. Then,
Yeah, but like suppose I don't know I'm suffering. Am I suffering?
well, from what perspective do you want me to
Buddhism.
resolve? Okay, so um, actually, you don't have to be safe. You think it as not suffering.
So am I suffering?
Maybe from conventional side you are suffering.
No, like from a Buddhist perspective.
Then
S-
you're not.
No, no, no. Yeah, okay. Hear me out, right? I am I am someone who never thinks about philosophy. Suppose that. Suppose I'm just living my life. I'm riding my truck. I got a wife and four children, and I'm going to enjoying this kind of upper class kind of very posh life, and I drive my Mercedes and truck. I go to bars, right? I never consider myself as a suffering person. As a Buddhist, do you consider that I'm suffering?
Then you're not.
So suffering is not universal.
Yes.
So it's not like ubiquitous. Because
Well,
if the universe is all suffering, then I cannot be not suffering, right? So, so like, how do you resolve the contradiction here?
okay, so first of all, you're doing something and you feel like that's pleasure.
Yeah,
You don't think you're suffering.
yeah.
And well, Buddhism says like if you're not feeling you're suffering, you actually don't have to learn those doctrines, but actually the problem is, are you suffering or not? Well, from Buddhism perspective, you are suffering.
So I am suffering, even
Yes.
though I don't know that I am.
Yeah.
Well, that's a really weird definition of suffering, Because usually when people think of suffering, they think of a bad experience. But my experience is nothing bad. It's very far from it.
Yeah.
Even if you say ignorance is bliss, right? Then I guess you're saying that bliss can also be suffering. So I guess the question then becomes, what am I suffering from? Obviously, I'm not. Well, I guess I could be suffering from these material objects, or I can be suffering from ignorance.
Yeah.
But I still think that that pushes the word suffering here is being used in a very liberal way. I think it pushes the meaning of suffering a bit too far,
Mm.
you
Okay.
know. Um, because I think, yeah, like if I'm just living my life, and there's this, Buddhist saying that, oh, you're suffering. Well, oh,
Well, but
like chill, dude.
like Buddhism actually don't tell you that you're suffering because you're personally experienced.
No, but you think that I am.
Yeah, but they don't think you're necessary to learn this.
Yeah, yeah,
They're
yeah,
not
but
telling you.
but well, yeah, that seems like, but that's not that moral, right? You see someone suffer and you're not willing to help them.
Yeah, because you're feeling you're
Yeah,
not.
but I'm suffering, right? From your perspective.
Yes, but
So
actually,
you're saying so you're saying a Buddhist can see someone suffer and not care about it.
yeah.
That seems to me just
No,
cruelty.
no.
Unless you want to use this word in
When
some
you're
kind of weird way.
experiencing pleasure, you will like when you're enjoying your life.
Yeah.
Someone comes to you and say you're suffering. Will listen to them.
Well, you might start realizing that your life is actually just the fulfilling of meaningless desires,
Well then, well,
and you'll start to suffer, like to
yeah,
suffer
yeah,
in
yeah.
the sensational sense. Maybe you'll stop to suffer in the metaphysical sense.
Yeah, so when you are experiencing that, when you realize that you are suffering, then you can go learn Buddhism. But when you're not suffering, you cannot.
Wait, wait, wait. What do you mean when you're not suffering? In Buddhism, you're always gonna suffer. So you mean like when you don't think that you're
Yeah, when you
suffering?
don't think you're suffering.
Yeah, but yeah, again, I think that's just cruelty. If what you say is all true, that's basically seeing someone suffer, maybe not in a direct way, but in a metaphysical way, suffering from the lack of knowledge. And you're saying, well, I'm not willing to help that person who is suffering.
Well, I think like
And like further, wouldn't that person just suffer forever? if you don't tell them. They're gonna just happily enjoy life forever, which by your definition is somehow gonna be suffering.
Yeah, but when they were experiencing happiness, then they should not go and learn Buddhism because, like, it's quite personal. Like, when you are like, when you are thinking you are living happily,
Yeah.
you actually suffering, but you don't have to care about that because when someone come and told you you're suffering, there's nothing to do with your own recognition of your life.
But you can make, well, like as like suppose that I'm that rich dude from before, right? Suppose that one day a Buddhist monk comes up to me and tells me I'm suffering, and I start to reflect on my luxurious life, and I realize, oh, all of this is just meaningless. I'm just controlled by my desires and so on. And then I start to live in a more Buddhist way. I live in a more mindful way. Well, wouldn't that be, less suffering than before?
Hmm. Well, I think like suffering can also happens in those rich people or those people who think they are living happily because they they have ignorance,
Yeah,
attachment.
yeah, yeah. So what I'm saying is that even if I'm really happy by a conventional sense, the Buddhists will still argue that I could be more happy if I would have rejected those sensational happiness and turn to Buddhism.
Yeah, you can. Yeah.
Yeah, so why not convince someone to be a Buddhist?
Well, you can, but well, I don't really know that.
Yeah, so I guess the last resort will probably to say something to the effect that Buddhism is like a democratic religion, you're not trying to convince people all the time. Or personally, more likely, I think that those people aren't really suffering. Um, but we can argue on that. But let's return to the question of death right here. Um, so I would like to ask, how do Buddhist teachings address this emotion we all feel when we think of death? Well, maybe not all, but most of us feel, which is the emotion of fear. And what guidance does Buddhism offer to overcome this effective challenge of fear?
Okay, so I would like to use the text from Aristotle, and
Hmm.
I translated into English. It's like whoever with certainty has the thought, I'm going to die, having completely relinquished attachment, how could they fear even the Lord of Death? So though none of us think like when we're reflecting from the things I have just said, though none of us think we will live forever. We actually ask if certain we will not die today, tomorrow, next month, or next year. So in fact, our hopes and plans are based on the assumption that we will live for a long time. And we plan to secure our livelihood, possessions, wealth, and friends and status. But in our pursuit and acquisition of these things, actually they involves in craving and attachment. Therefore, the hostility arises towards anyone or anything that could deprive us of what we seek or damage what is ours. We are unaware of the destructiveness or attachment and anger, so we create much harm, which causes us trouble in this life and destroys our chances for happiness in the future lives, and thus the possibility of attaining liberation or even good rebirth grows more remote.
Hmm.
So, actually, from Buddhism perspective, we should have a mind that we are going to die, and we should have fear to die. Because when you're assuming that you will live for a long time, you will have craving, attachment, and ignorance, making you suffer in this life and also make you suffer in the next life. And when you actually have the fear and awareness that you are going to die when you are facing the death, you actually learn to cherish every moment and actually learn to grow to be mindful in daily life. Yeah, which
But
is very good for our um this our whole life. Yeah, that's it.
yeah, so well, that's interesting because on the face of it, that seems to be quite inconsistent. Since in philosophy, I mean, in Buddhism, you don't really die. Um, you are actually mortal beings,
Mhm.
but you must imagine yourself as going to die. I don't exactly get this part. Is this like some kind of placebo? Like you just imagine you're going to die so that you live better in your in your immortal life? Is that what it's arguing?
Yeah, so I think like the text I have just read that like, whoever with certainty has they thought I'm going to die. That's actually from a conventional opinion. It's not actually the true opinion from Buddhism.
Yeah, so you shouldn't fear death if you're a true Buddhist
Yeah.
then. But like as you argued, if you don't fear death, you're gonna get more and more greedy because consider the atheist materialist, um like myself, right? Well, I'm not a materialist, I'm not exactly an atheist, but let's just suppose that I am. Well, when I consider the question of like greed, right? I think greed is ultimately quite absurd because you can't really carry anything with you beyond the point of the grave. Um, but I guess like in Buddhism, you can in a certain sense. Can you be greedy for karma? Can you be like, I want so much karma. I want like 3 million karma
Yeah, there's
points.
also the craving and attachment.
Yeah, but wouldn't that make sense? Because if you have eternal life, and the point of your eternal life is to get many karma, you know, or actually, or maybe it's for enlightenment, but you know, it's also for karma. Wouldn't it make sense, right? That you want karma because you're not gonna die.
Hmm. So what do you think? So like from Buddhism perspective, when you're a true Buddhist practitioner, uh, you will actually notice that you have attachment and you will find that in your mind you have Korean attachment.
Hmm.
So when you are actually facing the death, like you already know you will live moral, but um this will not lead to the craving for karma, isn't it?
Why?
Because you're a practitioner and you find out that this attachment and craving is not good for karma.
Oh, so I guess you were just like healthily healthily develop karma. Less craving, more just like pursuing pursuing, you know. I guess that yeah, I guess that sort of makes sense. Um and here's quite a personal one. Um like what's the insight for accepting the loss of loved ones and the grieving and what kind of consolances can Buddhism offer? And I actually have a personal story on this one. A few months ago, one of my relatives passed away, and my father, who is a Buddhist practitioner, he really helped my relative's family go through the whole grieving process with, Buddhism, with reciting Buddhist texts, going to pray and to teach about doctrines like the soul wouldn't leave until a certain amount of days, and then you can still communicate with the soul in dreams and so on. But obviously, from my perspective, that's not really philosophically sound, right? That's more like religion, the religious aspect of it. So, what are some of the more philosophical consolances that Buddhism can offer to someone who's grieving?
Okay, so first I would like to say about you have just said like your one of your relatives just passed away and they were doing those ceremony. So I actually do an research on that and I found out that the original Buddhism is not like this. And after that, when it went into China, in around Song Dynasty, like those nobles in governments, they escaped from governments for some reasons, because like the government's trying to kill them all because they're all craving and they have all craving and attachment for those possessions and properties, and they
Hmm.
and the safest place for them to go is the temple. So they came to Buddhism's temple, and they actually put those things like enjoyment or ceremony or singing and dance, those ceremony stuff into Buddhism temple, and after that they kind of mix together, and nowadays just form those ceremony. And I would like to say, when you are like when you're offer like when the insights the Buddhism offer on the grieving process and the loss of the lost ones actually is the problem of the three roots of suffering. So
Hmm.
we have to, like, we know that everything is changing in Buddhism, and it is impermanence. So if one feels that the thing he or she used to experience is not as same as what he or she is experiencing, when there is a big difference between the past experience and nowadays experience, then that is the base of suffering. And aversion and attachment, confusion actually made this difference between experience into suffering.
So you're saying that we should accept changes and impermanences.
Yes.
But why are you still grieving over your girlfriend?
Well, I think that's kind of not for logic, not for our, like, we are trying to grieve them because ah we want a way to memorize them, even though she's passed away.
No, she has not passed away. She just left you.
And that's the thing for you to memorize, right? To memorize those
Oh.
good experience.
Well, that seems to me to be an example of attachment, which is the second cause of suffering.
Whoa. Well, then that is not good. Like Buddhism doesn't tell you to grieve your girlfriend.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. So,
No.
so what's the third one?
Okay, and the third one is ignorance.
Of what?
No, I think the three roots of suffering is aversion, attachment, and confusion. These are the
Oh,
three roots. That's
what's
made
aversion?
aversion. Aversion is like you hate someone, you're
Oh,
unsatisfied with someone.
yeah. Well, it seems like you're quite confused too. On this particular issue. Um, but okay, I'll stop picking on you. But yeah, I think that's. But I don't see how that can act as a practical assistance, though. You can tell someone, oh, you shouldn't suffer because suffering comes from these sources, and these sources may be predicated on some false metaphysical assumption about the soul and the self. I guess so, but that's hmm.
Yeah, but actually there are some actually real practice methods for you to use. For example, like Eightfold Path.
Hmm.
When you're following that, you can cultivate your mindfulness, and you, like, from Buddhism perspective, you will actually accept the changing.
Yeah, one would imagine so, and I mean, if you think of this in the context of even Western philosophers like Parfit, his idea of survival really fits into the idiom of someone who's deceased being survived by their close friends and relatives, or offsprings or parents. I think a similar idea is true also of Buddhism because when you lose hold of the self, it seems like dying isn't as real as before because what is dying is essentially the termination, the annihilation of the self, right? But if there's no self to begin with, well, obviously then you can uh console yourself that well, yeah, that's kind of like a slip right there. But you can feel consoled from the fact that nothing really went out. Okay, so unfortunately, we wouldn't have that much space to cover all the points prepared, but I guess one question that I had, because I've actually done a little bit of reading on end of life care and I have volunteered um at care centers for people who have terminal illnesses. So what are some of the Buddhist teachings that integrate traditional ideas about death, like the ones you mentioned, with contemporary issues such as medical ethics and end of life care?
Okay, so like nowadays, there is actually a new type of Buddhism, which is we also called like left-wing Buddhism, which is engaged Buddhism, which is very popular in America and Vietnam. So the founder of this type of Buddhism um, is Thich Nhat Hanh, which is absolutely, I think, from Americans people's perspective, the best Buddhism master in the world. And like Thich Nhat Hanh, he is trying to establish those hospitals or charities in order to help people. And they actually like there is a conference in California University, in Berkeley, and they brought those Buddhist scholars, practices, and also healthcare professors, and those professors, pro, prof, prof, professors who are very proficient in medical caring and like how to learn to cure people better. Like they actually come together and discuss how could they help those people uh in the hospitals and when they're nearing to the death. Yeah.
Yeah, that's nice. When I was at the hospice care center, it was not a happy place. Um, and I was helping them taking care of patients. There was a very large Buddhist temple slash sanctuary in the hospital itself. I remember it was like lavishly decorated with all the traditions. In fact, you would have like a Christian one, and then right next door is like Muslim one, and then the biggest one is like the Buddhist one because in China a lot of people are Buddhists. So, kind of like there's a lot of religious practices that goes on there so that people feel better about passing, or should I say not passing, not truly passing. Um, and yeah, and actually, if you volunteer there, you must take a little course about Buddhism too. Um, but I guess the kind of care that you're talking about here, and that's being discussed in Berkeley, I would assume is quite different from this type, which is arguably more superficial from a philosophical point of view, although probably more, maybe not impactful, but it does have a profound social, cultural, and uh, mental, psychological dimension to it that unfortunately we wouldn't able to dive into very deep here, as this is about philosophy. Um, but yeah, it's also a way of bringing people together. Like religion is a way of social organization, and so on. So just to end us off here, let's end on a little bit of a happier note. What can people learn from Buddhism, and what can people learn from what Buddhists think about death and dying.
Okay, so I would like to begin with my personal experience also.
Hmm.
Like when I'm in ninth grade and eighth grade, I held camps, like the real camps in Huizhou for people to sign up and they can go to a very famous temple in Huizhou called Longhua Si, and they were able to experience the life in the temple. They
Hmm.
eat, they meditation and they eat vegetables and those stuff, and they listen to those people, those monks, singing, and they're doing some ceremony there. And I think that's a pretty efficient way for people to know Buddhism, and it's actually don't cost so much time.
Hmm.
And I think when people they are actually feeling they are suffering, they probably will find something that can help them in Buddhism. During the time they were experiencing the life in the temple. And well, for those people, like they feel their life is pleasure. They actually
Hmm.
don't have to. Like they will just go away. They do nothing. Like it's it's necessary for them to learn in this temple. And so I think it's quite efficient. And also, I think for Buddhism, we should have some more philosophical way to develop the Buddhism. Because, actually, many people think Buddhism as like supernatural stuff. Because, like, they heard that there are so many people that they were able to fly in the sky, to cross the ocean in a fraction of a second. And that is not the whole picture of the Buddhism. And I think like we should promote more logic, metaphysics, or philosophy, ethics, moral ethics in Buddhism to actually let people get know more about Buddhism, to know that Buddhism is a very logical religion. Like
Hmm.
it's yeah, and very big. And it's actually can help people to know that Buddhism is not just supernatural, not just stuff, and it's actually did help people to get out from some suffering. Yeah, and I think that's a really good way.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I think that does sums up a lot of the directions that mindfulness and Buddhism can take, especially as it relates to us. More people are meditating these days. And as you said, that camp seems to also be something that I could see fitting into the life of someone living in the contemporary world, confused by all the microaggressions and micro sufferings and just the structure of modernity that goes on. And I think Buddhism does offer a kind of place where we can see this issue from another perspective. So thank you, John, for being here, and
Thank you.
please tune in for future episodes of Opinionate. Bye.
Yay. Bye.